Apache Woman in the Winter Creek, The Drifter Who Saved Her Life, a Wild West true grit tale. The winter in the Arizona Territory was harsher than Taya had ever known. The cold cut through her clothing like knives, and the wind whipped against her face, leaving her cheeks red and raw. Snow blanketed the land in silence, turning the familiar hills and creeks into a strange frozen world. Taya, an Apache woman in her early 20s, moved carefully along the edge of Winter Creek, her eyes sharp and her senses alert. She had traveled these lands since she was a child, learning the hidden paths through forests and the ways to read the signs of animals and people. But today, the snow made the familiar dangerous. Tracks were easily hidden, and the creek, usually shallow, had frozen in patches that could break under weight. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and glanced down at the icy water below. The creek flowed slowly beneath the snow-covered banks, the surface glittering like glass in the weak winter sun. Taya took a deep breath. She could hear the distant call of a crow, the crackle of frozen branches as small animals scurried under the snow. Every sound was magnified in the winter's quiet, and every shadow could be hiding danger. She had learned long ago that being alone in these lands meant constant vigilance. Her journey had begun after a raid scattered her band. Soldiers had come without warning, and in the chaos, families were separated. Taya had escaped with only the essentials she could carry: a small knife, some dried meat, a water pouch, and the few blankets that had survived the attack. Her heart ached for her people, but she knew she had to keep moving. To stop meant death, not just from the cold, but from the merciless soldiers and the lawless men who roamed the territory, looking for trouble or easy prey. The snow had been falling steadily for hours, and now the wind carried it sideways, stinging her eyes. Taya slowed her steps and crouched beside a large rock, peering ahead at the trail. She spotted faint tracks in the snow, small at first, as if made by a lone traveler. Her brow furrowed. The tracks were too regular, too deliberate. Someone had been there recently, and they were watching, or perhaps following. She could feel it in the silence around her, in the tension of the wind. Taya pressed herself against the rock and closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered her mother teaching her how to listen to the land. The wind could carry danger, but it also carried messages if one paid attention. She inhaled slowly and let her senses spread. Yes, she could feel it now. Someone was near, hidden in the forest that lined the creek, but it was impossible to tell if they meant harm or if they were another lost traveler like herself. She rose slowly, keeping her movements low and deliberate, and began to follow the creek upstream. The snow had made the journey slow and treacherous. Every step could slide, every branch could snap. Yet, Taya moved with the quiet confidence of someone born to the land. She had survived worse storms, and she had survived being alone. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and her fingers were stiff and numb, but she would not let weakness slow her down. Not now. Hours passed, and the sun dipped low behind the mountains. Shadows stretched across the snow, dark and long. Taya knew she needed shelter before the night truly fell. The winter nights here could be deadly. Frostbite would set in, and the cold could drain life faster than hunger. She spotted a natural alcove in the rocks, a shallow cave partly covered by fallen branches and snow. Carefully, she made her way toward it, checking behind her constantly. The tracks seemed to vanish near the creek's bend, but she remained cautious. The silence was too heavy, almost unnatural. Inside the alcove, Taya settled herself on a bed of pine needles she had gathered. She used her shawl to cover her legs and took a small portion of the dried meat she carried. Her body shivered as she ate, but she kept her mind sharp. Even as she chewed slowly, she listened. The creek's murmur was soft here, almost gentle, but the wind outside rattled the branches in a menacing rhythm. Something in the air told her this night would be long, and the forest would demand her full attention. As darkness fell, she heard it, a snap of a branch far off in the forest. She froze, straining to listen. It could be a deer or a rabbit, but the pattern was different. It was too steady, too deliberate, like someone walking carefully, watching, waiting. Taya's hand instinctively went to her knife, her fingers brushing the worn leather handle. Her pulse quickened. She had been alone for days, relying on stealth and speed to survive, but the thought of someone else in the forest filled her with both fear and curiosity. She waited, every muscle tense. Minutes passed like hours. Then she saw a shadow move between the trees, barely visible through the falling snow. Taya did not shout or move suddenly. She had learned that sudden actions could give away her position. Instead, she studied the shadow, noting its gait, its shape. It was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, moving carefully, as though he knew the dangers of the forest. Taya felt a strange mixture of caution and relief. A man in these woods could be dangerous, but it could also mean help. She remembered the stories her grandmother told, of travelers who had come across Apache women and offered aid in times of need. But she also remembered the cautionary tales, the warnings of those who had been betrayed by strangers. She would not let hope make her careless. The man came closer, and she could see him more clearly now. His face was shadowed under a wide hat, his coat heavy and worn. He moved with the ease of someone used to the wilderness, and there was a quiet strength in his steps. Taya made a decision. She would not run, nor would she attack. If he meant harm, she would be ready, but if he was a friend, or at least not a threat, she could not survive the winter alone without help. When he finally reached the edge of the alcove, he stopped and raised his hand slightly, a gesture of peace. "Easy now," he said, his voice low but calm. "I'm not here to hurt you." Taya did not respond immediately. She studied him, noting the lines of his face, the careful way he held himself. There was truth in his eyes, a quiet honesty that was rare in these lands. Slowly, she lowered her hand from her knife. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the cold. "Caleb Boone," he replied. "Just a traveler, like you. Been wandering these parts for years." Taya's mind raced. Could she trust him? She had learned to trust only herself, yet something about him seemed different. He did not rush forward, did not demand her attention, and he seemed as cautious as she was. She nodded slightly. "You stay there. I will watch." Caleb nodded and did not move closer. He seemed to understand the unspoken rules of the forest, the delicate balance between caution and survival. They remained like that for a long while, two figures in the snow, separated by a few feet but bound by the unspoken understanding that the forest was neither kind nor forgiving. As night deepened, Taya could feel the cold biting harder. She shivered and hugged her shawl tighter, but she kept her eyes on Caleb. He, too, seemed affected by the cold, yet he made no move to intrude on her space. Slowly, she realized something she had not allowed herself to feel in days. A flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, she was not entirely alone in this frozen wilderness. And so, the first night at Winter Creek passed, with Taya alert and watchful, Caleb nearby but distant, and the wind howling around them. The snow continued to fall, covering the world in white, hiding paths and footprints, but also offering a kind of shelter from the dangers beyond the creek. Taya lay back on the pine needles, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. She did not yet know if Caleb would be a friend or a threat, but for the first time in days, she felt a small measure of safety. The creek flowed quietly beside them, and for a moment, in the heart of winter, survival seemed possible. Little did Taya know, this encounter would change the course of her journey. The harsh winter and the hidden dangers of the forest were only the beginning. The stranger at the creek was more than he seemed, and the days ahead would test not only her skill and courage, but the very trust she had learned to guard with her life. The morning light arrived slowly over Winter Creek, pale and cold, spilling across the snow-covered banks. Taya awoke with the ache of frost in her bones and the dull hunger gnawing at her stomach. She rose carefully, pressing her shawl tighter around her shoulders. When she looked toward the edge of the alcove, she saw the figure of the stranger, Caleb Boone, still standing there. He had not moved during the night, and though the cold had left frost on his coat and hat, he seemed unbothered, as if he belonged to the wilderness itself. Taya studied him quietly. There was a calm in his posture, a patience that surprised her. Most people in these lands would have demanded shelter, supplies, or even trust without earning it. But Caleb seemed different. He did not speak at first, only waited, watching her as carefully as she watched him. Finally, she nodded slightly, acknowledging him. He returned the gesture, a small, almost imperceptible smile on his face. "Eat," he said softly, placing a small bundle of dried meat on a flat rock nearby. "You'll need strength to keep moving." Taya hesitated. She had learned long ago not to accept gifts from strangers. Yet, hunger was sharp, and the smell of the meat stirred something in her that she had not felt for days. Relief. Slowly, she took a piece and bit into it. It was dry but filling, and warmth spread in her stomach with each chew. She did not speak, only watched him, noticing the way his eyes scanned the trees, alert to every sound.
"You can trust me," Caleb said quietly.
"I've wandered these lands a long time. I've seen what it takes to survive alone. You're strong, but even the strong need help sometimes." Taya considered his words. She had survived storms, hunger, and soldiers hunting her people, yet the thought of help felt strange. Still, she nodded again, deciding to keep moving alongside him for the time being. Trust could be earned, and she would watch him closely. The two began to walk along the edge of the creek, carefully stepping over icy patches. Taya led the way at first, her knowledge of the land guiding them. She knew which rocks were solid, which branches would snap, and which parts of the snow hid deep holes. Caleb followed silently, matching her pace, careful not to startle her. Despite his quiet presence, Taya noticed his skill. He moved with the ease of someone who had survived countless winters, tracking animals, avoiding danger, and understanding the rhythms of the land. They had walked only a short distance when Taya spotted fresh tracks in the snow. She froze, motioning for Caleb to stop. He crouched beside her, studying the prints with interest. "Hunters?" Caleb asked softly. "Mercenaries, maybe soldiers," Taya replied, her voice tense. "They have been in this area. My people were scattered. They might be searching for survivors, or someone they believe took something from them." Caleb nodded. "We'll keep moving, but quietly. Follow me. I know a way that will take us off the main trail." He led them through a series of narrow paths, hidden among trees and rocks. Taya marveled at his ability to read the forest, to know where the snow was deep and where the ground was solid. For hours they moved in silence, broken only by the soft crunch of snow beneath their boots and the distant call of birds. Despite the cold, a bond began to form, a silent understanding between two people who had learned to survive by their own strength. As the sun rose higher, the cold became more biting. Taya's fingers were stiff, and her feet ached from the frozen ground. Caleb noticed her discomfort and suggested a brief stop. He built a small fire with twigs and pine needles, shielding it from the wind with a rock wall he quickly assembled. The flames danced, casting shadows across the snow, and for a moment warmth returned to their bodies.
"You have survived alone for a long time," Caleb said, breaking the silence.
What kept you going? Taya looked into the fire, thinking of her scattered family, her people's homeland, and the memories of her mother teaching her to hunt and gather. I had to survive, she said finally. No one else could do it for me. The land teaches you, but you must listen. Every step, every sound. It is life or death. Caleb nodded, respecting her words. I understand. I've wandered long enough to know the same. Out here, mistakes can cost you everything. They ate the small rations they carried, sharing the warmth of the fire in silence. Despite the danger that surrounded them, a fragile sense of trust began to take root. Taya had learned to rely only on herself, yet there was something steady about Caleb's presence, a promise that he would not betray her. After resting, they resumed their journey, following the creek toward higher ground. The snow had deepened, and the cold was relentless. Taya noticed how Caleb moved carefully, using his hands and boots to test ice-covered rocks and slippery paths. At one point, a thin patch of ice cracked under her weight, and she fell to her knees. Caleb reached out instantly, steadying her with a firm grip. You must watch every step, he said gently. Winter here does not forgive mistakes. Taya nodded, her heart pounding from the near fall. It was strange to feel someone else's hand on her arm, not as a threat, but as support. She realized that Caleb was not just surviving, he was skilled in ways that complemented her own abilities. Together they were stronger than they were alone. As evening approached, the wind grew colder and the shadows longer. Taya spotted an abandoned miner's cabin perched on a small rise above the creek. It was battered by years of weather, but it offered shelter from the worst of the storm. They approached cautiously, checking for signs of danger. The door creaked as Caleb pushed it open, revealing a small interior with a dirt floor, broken furniture, and remnants of a fireplace. Now, not much, but enough. Inside, Taya sank to the floor, wrapping herself in her shawl. Caleb gathered old boards and kindling, starting a fire with remarkable ease. The warmth spread through the cabin, and Taya felt a relief she had not known for days. She watched him carefully, noting how he moved, how he cared for the fire, how he seemed at ease despite the freezing winter outside. You are good at this, she said finally. Caleb shrugged. Surviving is about knowing what to do and when to do it. You already know that. We just help each other along. Taya nodded, feeling a connection growing between them. They shared more food and spoke little, conserving energy and keeping the fire alive. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the cabin and tossing snow against the walls. Inside, there was a fragile sense of safety, a small island in the heart of winter. During the night, Taya awoke to the sound of movement outside. She froze, listening. Footsteps? Perhaps an animal. She pressed herself against the wall and gripped her knife. Caleb stirred beside her, sensing her tension. They are gone, he said quietly. Or at least far enough not to notice us. Sleep now. She wanted to argue, but exhaustion overtook fear. She drifted into a deep sleep, the warmth of the fire and the presence of another human beside her easing the loneliness she had carried for so long. By morning, Taya felt a little stronger. Caleb had already prepared a small meal and inspected the surrounding forest. The wind had calmed slightly, and the sun reflected brightly off the snow. They would continue their journey, following the creek toward higher ground, seeking safety, food, and perhaps a chance to reunite Taya with any remaining members of her people. As they stepped outside, the cold burned their faces, but there was a shared determination between them. They moved carefully, silently, like shadows among the trees. Taya noticed that Caleb observed her closely, not with suspicion, but with respect. And for the first time in many days, she felt the faintest hope that she was not entirely alone in the wilderness. The journey along Winter Creek had just begun. Together, they would face the frozen forests, hidden dangers, and unknown paths ahead. Taya could not yet know how important Caleb would become in her survival, or how the bond formed in the icy wilderness would shape the days to come. But for now, she trusted him enough to move forward, one step at a time, along the snow-covered trail, following the quiet strength of a drifter who seemed to belong to the land itself. The morning air was sharp and cold, the kind that made every breath sting, and Taya could feel her muscles tighten from the chill. Winter Creek sparkled under a pale sun, its icy banks glinting like silver. The wind had calmed slightly, but the forest still whispered of hidden dangers. Taya and Caleb moved carefully, following the creek toward higher ground. Each step left deep impressions in the fresh snow, marking their path like a fragile trail through a frozen world. Taya noticed the tracks again, faint and distant. At first, she hoped it was the wind playing tricks, or perhaps animals following the creek. But her heart sank when she recognized the telltale signs. These were not deer or rabbits. The prints were deliberate, human, and they had a purpose. Someone was following them. She froze, pressing a gloved hand to her chest. "They're behind us," she whispered. Caleb slowed his pace and knelt to examine the tracks. "Yes," he murmured. "Mercenaries, I'd say. Probably the same ones who scattered your band. They're tracking carefully, trying not to alert us." Taya's eyes narrowed. "They won't stop until they find me, or think I'm gone." Caleb nodded. "Then we have to be smarter. Move quietly. Don't give them the advantage. Don't give them the advantage." For hours they wound through the trees, leaping over frozen branches, sliding down icy slopes, and crossing shallow patches of the creek where the ice held. Taya felt her muscles ache from the cold and constant movement, but adrenaline pushed her forward. Every shadow made her pause, every sound made her alert. She could feel the presence of their pursuers just out of sight, like a weight pressing on her back. Caleb suggested they take a circuitous route, climbing a ridge that overlooked the creek. "If we can get to higher ground," he said, "we can see them before they see us. That will give us a chance to plan." The climb was steep and treacherous. Snow slipped beneath their boots, and rocks jutted out like frozen teeth. Taya's heart pounded in her chest, but she followed Caleb's careful steps. He reached back a hand, helping her over a particularly slippery rock. She hesitated, then took it, feeling the warmth and steadiness of his grip. At the top of the ridge, they crouched behind a cluster of pines, the forest opening before them like a frozen panorama. Below, in the shallow valley along the creek, a group of men moved slowly, carefully, following their tracks. Taya counted 6 of them, rough-looking, armed, and methodical. Their faces were shadowed by hats, but their intent was clear. They would not leave the forest without capturing whoever they pursued. "They're good," Caleb said quietly. "They've tracked you this far without making a sound. Pfft, we have to be careful. One mistake and they could be on top of us in seconds." Taya swallowed hard. Her fingers were stiff around her knife, and her stomach knotted, but fear did not stop her. She had survived too much to freeze now. "We'll need a plan," she said. "We can't outrun them for long. The snow will tire us, and they'll keep following." Caleb nodded. "We'll use the terrain. We'll look for narrow spots, fallen trees, places where we can set traps or force them into a bottleneck. The forest will be our ally if we think carefully." They moved cautiously along the ridge, scanning the forest below. Taya spotted a fallen tree bridging a small ravine. If they could lure the pursuers toward it, they could slow them down, or even cause a misstep that would give Taya and Caleb time to escape. She pointed it out to Caleb. He studied it, then nodded. "Yes, that could work. But we have to stay hidden. Let them take the lead, and we strike when the moment is right." The hours dragged on. The cold seeped into their bones and hunger gnawed at their stomachs, but they pressed forward, following the ridge and staying ahead of the men below. Taya admired Caleb's patience and skill. He did not rush, did not panic, and he read the land like a map. She realized that together they were stronger than either alone. By late afternoon, the men had almost reached the base of the ridge. Caleb and Taya crouched behind a dense thicket, the branches heavy with snow. Taya's breath came in shallow bursts, and her eyes were sharp, noting every movement. The men below seemed confident, but Caleb had taught her to read the signs of overconfidence. A single misstep on the icy ground, a false move, and their pursuers would stumble, or worse. Caleb whispered, "Now, carefully." He pointed to the fallen tree across the ravine. "If one of them steps on that ice-covered log, it will tip, and they'll have to scramble. That will give us the chance to move farther along the ridge." Taya nodded, her heart pounding. They waited, silent as the forest itself. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of the men below. Taya tightened her grip on her knife, feeling the cold steel press against her palm. She could almost taste the danger, sharp and real. Then a man's foot slipped on the log. He stumbled, cursed, and the other men rushed to help. The log shifted, the ice cracking under weight, and the sudden movement startled a flock of birds. Snow fell from the trees like rain, obscuring vision. Taya and Caleb used the moment, sliding carefully down the ridge, keeping low, moving silently among the trees. The men below cursed and shouted, but their progress was slowed. Caleb pointed ahead. "Keep moving. Higher ground. Don't stop." They climbed another slope, exhaustion pressing on them with every step. Taya's legs burned, her lungs ached, but adrenaline and the need to survive kept her going. The forest was no longer just a place to hide. It was a battlefield. Every fallen branch, every mound of snow, every shadow became a tool for survival. As evening approached, they reached a small plateau with a natural cave at its edge. It was barely more than a shallow opening in the rock, but it offered shelter and a vantage point to watch the valley below. They entered carefully, brushing snow from the floor and arranging stones to reflect what little heat they could generate from a small fire. Taya sat close to the fire, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders. She looked at Caleb, noticing how steady he remained despite the danger. "You faced many winters like this?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "Enough to know what works and what doesn't. The forest teaches you. So do mistakes." Taya listened, comforted by the calm in his voice. For days, She had been alone, surviving on instinct and memory, constantly alert to danger. Now, with Caleb beside her, she felt a faint sense of relief. Not trust yet, not fully, but a fragile hope. Night fell and the wind howled outside the cave. Taya kept watch while Caleb arranged their supplies, keeping the fire alive. Every crack of a branch or crunch of snow made her heart race. Yet she also noticed how Caleb moved, his senses attuned to the forest, noticing things she might have missed. He had a quiet skill, a patience born of years of wandering and surviving alone. Hours passed, and the danger seemed to recede slightly. Taya spoke quietly. "Do you think they'll keep following us?" "They might," Caleb said. "Or they might give up. But even if they do, there are others in these lands who will not hesitate to take advantage of weakness. We move carefully, always. That's how we survive." Taya nodded, understanding. Survival was more than avoiding bullets or frostbite. It was reading the world, knowing who to trust, and knowing when to move. And with Caleb beside her, she felt they had a chance, a stronger chance than if she had been alone. They rested briefly, but sleep was light and cautious. Taya awoke several times to the sound of snow shifting outside the cave, always ready for the worst. Caleb, too, stirred but remained calm, a silent guardian in the frozen night. By dawn they were ready to move again, following the creek through the treacherous winter forest, their eyes sharp, their minds focused. The pursuit was far from over, but Taya had learned something crucial. She was no longer entirely alone. With Caleb's knowledge and her own survival skills, they could face the dangers ahead. The forest was harsh, the snow relentless, but together they were stronger than fear, stronger than the men hunting them below, and stronger than winter itself. Step by step they moved forward, through snow and shadow, aware that each moment carried both danger and opportunity. Taya's heart beat with tension, but also with determination. The days ahead would test her courage, her skill, and her trust, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope. And in the quiet of Winter Creek, surrounded by the icy forest, two survivors, an Apache woman and a wandering drifter, began to navigate a world of peril, learning that cunning, courage, and trust could be the difference between life and death. The snow had thickened by morning, covering the forest floor in a soft, unbroken blanket. The trees were heavy with ice and frost, bending under the weight of winter's grip. Taya shivered as she stepped out of the shallow cave, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. The wind had grown stronger, carrying snow in swirling gusts that blurred the edges of the forest. Yet, she felt a growing sense of determination. She was alive, and with Caleb by her side, survival suddenly seemed possible. Caleb moved beside her with quiet confidence, scanning the trees and listening to the sounds of the forest. He spoke little, letting Taya lead at times, but always close enough that she could feel the steadiness of his presence. In the days they had been together, an unspoken trust had begun to grow. Small, but important. Each had survived alone for years, relying only on themselves, but now they had someone to rely on. Someone who understood the forest, its dangers, and the skills needed to endure it. They traveled slowly, aware that the snow made the terrain unpredictable. Ice-covered branches could snap under weight, and hidden patches of snow might conceal deep holes or rushing water beneath. Taya moved with precision, her instincts honed over a lifetime in the wilderness. Caleb followed, careful not to step too close or disrupt her path. Occasionally, he would point out subtle details, marks on trees, animal tracks, or patterns in the snow that Taya might have missed. She began to notice how skilled he was, not just in surviving the forest, but in reading it like a map. By midday, they found a small clearing. The sun, though weak, shone through the trees, reflecting off the snow and momentarily warming the cold air. They paused to rest, crouching behind a fallen tree for shelter. Taya pulled a small portion of dried meat from her pack, sharing some with Caleb. "It isn't much," she said, chewing carefully, "but it will keep us going." Caleb accepted it with a nod, his expression thoughtful. "It is enough if we ration carefully." Hunger is a test of patience as much as strength. They ate in silence, watching the forest around them, the snow-muffled sound making the woods eerily quiet. Occasionally, a branch would crack under its own weight, or a small animal would dart across the snow. Every movement reminded Taya of the fragility of life in the winter forest. Yet she felt a strange comfort in Caleb's presence, a sense that they were not alone in facing the harshness of nature. After a short rest, they continued. The day wore on, and the cold began to bite deeper, numbing fingers and toes despite their careful clothing. Taya noticed her own fatigue, the way her legs burned with each step, but she pressed on. Caleb seemed tireless, moving steadily, setting an example of quiet endurance. At one point, he reached out, steadying her as she slipped on a patch of ice. She hesitated for a moment, then took his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a kind of trust neither had spoken aloud. As they climbed a ridge overlooking the creek, Taya's thoughts drifted to her scattered people. She had no idea if her family or friends had survived or if she would ever see them again. The fear of losing everything pressed on her heart, but Caleb's steady presence reminded her that hope could still exist, even in the darkest winter. They found another cave, larger this time, partially hidden beneath snow-covered rocks. It was dry inside, offering shelter from the wind and a place to rest. Taya and Caleb entered carefully, arranging stones to reflect heat from a small fire. Caleb built. The warmth spread slowly through the space, melting some of the frost clinging to their clothing. "You've survived alone for so long," Caleb said quietly, sitting beside the fire. "I imagine it wasn't easy. The forest doesn't forgive mistakes." Taya nodded, staring into the flames. "It isn't easy," she said softly. "But you learn. Every day, every storm, every step teaches you something. You listen, you watch, and you survive. That's all there is." Caleb studied her for a moment, then said, "And now you have someone beside you, someone who can watch your back when you need it. That makes the difference." Taya considered his words. Trust was not easy for her. Years of surviving alone had taught her caution, but she realized that Caleb had earned it, quietly, by showing skill, patience, and respect. She began to feel a sense of companionship that she had not felt in a long time, a bond forged not through words but through shared struggle. The night settled over the forest, dark and cold. They huddled close to the fire, listening to the wind howl outside the cave. Each crack of a branch, each shifting of snow, kept their senses sharp. Taya could feel the pulse of the forest around them, alive with hidden sounds and distant movements. She thought of the men who had pursued her earlier, wondering if they had given up or were still following from afar. Caleb spoke quietly in the firelight, his voice calm. "We will move carefully tomorrow. The forest can hide us, but we must use it wisely. There is a path I know, one that will take us farther from anyone who hunts you." Taya nodded, grateful for his guidance. "I will follow your lead," she said, "but I will not be helpless. I know the land. I know the dangers. We survive together." For hours they spoke little, conserving energy and keeping the fire alive. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with understanding, respect, and the unspoken knowledge that each relied on the other. By the time they finally settled for sleep, a fragile sense of peace had settled over them. The next day they set out at dawn, climbing higher into the ridges where the snow was deeper but the forest provided cover. Taya's movements were precise, her eyes constantly scanning for danger. Caleb matched her steps, moving with care and skill. They crossed frozen streams, navigated icy slopes, and slipped silently between trees. Every step required attention, every breath careful not to reveal their location. During a brief pause in a small clearing, Taya noticed something remarkable: the way Caleb observed not only the forest but her movements. He seemed to understand her rhythm, her instincts, and he adjusted his steps to match hers. It was a subtle thing, but it created a sense of harmony. For the first time in weeks, Taya felt that she was not alone, that she was part of a small, unspoken team, two people navigating danger and winter together. As the day wore on, they encountered a shallow ravine blocked by fallen trees and snowdrifts. Taya paused, assessing the obstacles. Caleb knelt beside her, examining the path. "We can get across carefully," he said, pointing to a narrow, icy log that bridged the ravine. "One step at a time. Watch your balance, and we'll move together." Taya stepped first. Her knife clutched tightly and moved slowly across the log. Caleb followed closely, his presence steadying her. Halfway across, a branch cracked beneath their weight, and snow fell in a cascade. Taya froze, heart pounding, but Caleb reached out, steadying her with a firm hand. They continued, step by step, until they reached the other side safely. "That was close," Taya said, exhaling in relief. Caleb nodded. "Every step counts in winter. Mistakes are expensive." By evening, they found a shallow depression in the snow, surrounded by pine trees, offering some protection from the wind. They built a small fire, wrapped themselves in their blankets and shawls, and sat close to its warmth. Taya thought about the days they had survived together, the quiet moments of trust, the unspoken bond that had grown between them. She realized that Caleb had become more than a companion. He was a teacher, a protector, and a witness to her strength. Night fell, and the forest grew silent except for the occasional groan of ice-laden branches. Taya kept watch while Caleb arranged the fire and their sparse supplies. The wind howled, but inside their small circle of warmth there was a sense of safety. They spoke little, but each understood the other's presence. Taya thought of the journey ahead, of the dangers that awaited, and of the bond she had found in Caleb. The forest was harsh, winter unforgiving, but together they were stronger. She felt a quiet confidence, knowing that whatever challenges came, they would face them side by side. And so in the frozen wilderness of Winter Creek, two survivors, an Apache woman and a wandering drifter, grew closer with every step, every challenge, and every shared hardship. They learned that survival was not just about skill or strength, but about trust, respect, and the courage to depend on another, even in the harshest of winters. The sun rose weakly over Winter Creek, pale light reflecting off the snow-covered landscape. Taya and Caleb moved cautiously along the frozen banks, each step measured and careful. The pursuit they had endured for days had not ended. The tracks in the snow showed the same mercenaries were still following, though their movements had slowed. The cold and fatigue had likely begun to take its toll on the hunters, and Taya hoped this gave them an advantage. Every muscle in Taya's body ached from the climb and constant movement, but her mind remained sharp. She and Caleb had survived storms, frozen rivers, and treacherous slopes, and now, They faced the final challenge, confronting those who had hunted her so relentlessly. She glanced at Caleb, who moved with the quiet confidence of someone used to facing danger. There was no fear in his eyes, only focus. Taya felt a surge of courage. Together, they could face almost anything. As they neared a narrow gorge, Taya saw the perfect place to turn the chase into their advantage. The gorge was flanked by steep cliffs, icy and slick, with only a narrow path along the edge. A fall could be fatal, even to the most careful walker. She whispered to Caleb, outlining her plan. "We can use the gorge. They won't move carefully enough. One misstep and they could be trapped, or worse." Caleb nodded, understanding immediately. "It's risky," he said softly, "but it might be our best chance." They moved slowly, taking the narrow path with extreme caution. Taya's sharp eyes caught every loose stone, every patch of ice, every branch that might give way. Caleb stayed close, ready to support her if she slipped, but he also trusted her instincts. Step by step, they navigated the gorge, the sound of the creek below echoing faintly against the cliffs. Then they saw them, 6 men, cautious but confident, following the trail they had left in the snow. Taya felt her stomach tighten. The men looked strong and determined, but they did not know the terrain like she did. Every rock, every tree, every icy patch was an advantage for the women and Caleb, who knew how to survive here. Taya crouched behind a boulder, signaling Caleb to do the same. "We wait," she whispered. "We make them come to us." They watched as the men approached, unaware of the trap waiting ahead. The first man stepped onto a patch of ice, trying to cross a narrow stone bridge over the creek. The ice cracked under his weight, and he stumbled, arms flailing. The others rushed to help him, slipping and sliding in the chaos. Taya and Caleb moved quickly, silently along a safer ledge above, keeping their distance but ready to act if needed. The men cursed and shouted, their confidence faltering. Snow and ice made every movement precarious, and Taya could see their frustration growing. It was the perfect moment to push the advantage. She whispered to Caleb, "We don't strike yet. Let them exhaust themselves. Then we control the path." They waited, eyes sharp, watching the men lose balance and coordination. Finally, Taya saw an opportunity. A large branch had fallen across the gorge, precariously balanced over the icy rocks. With careful timing, she nudged it just enough to tip, sending a small avalanche of snow and ice toward the men. They scrambled, caught off guard, sliding down toward the frozen creek below. One man managed to grab a tree branch, narrowly avoiding a fall, while another slipped into the shallow water with a loud splash. Caleb moved beside Taya, scanning for any threat that might emerge from the chaos. "They won't get up quickly," he said. "We have the path for now." Taya nodded, adrenaline surging through her veins. For the first time in days, she felt the power of the forest behind her, her knowledge of the land, her instincts, and Caleb's skill working together. Step by step, they continued along the gorge, using every rock, tree, and ridge to their advantage, keeping the men disoriented and struggling behind them. By midday, they reached a small plateau above the creek, a flat area with a natural shelter among the rocks. Taya paused, scanning the tracks below. The men had regrouped, but they were slower, more cautious. The snow had tired them, and the treacherous terrain had forced mistakes. "We can rest here," Caleb said. "We're ahead, but they won't give up easily. We need to be ready." Taya nodded, her breath coming in shallow bursts. She crouched behind a rock and pulled out the last of her food supplies, breaking it into small portions. Caleb accepted his share, and they ate slowly, conserving energy while keeping their eyes on the forest below. As evening approached, the wind picked up again, sending snow swirling through the trees. Taya and Caleb prepared for another night in the frozen wilderness. They built a small fire, shielding it with rocks, and huddled close together for warmth. The forest seemed endless, vast, and silent except for the faint rush of the creek below. Taya looked at Caleb, noting the calm determination in his face. "You've saved me more than once," she said softly. "I don't know how I would have survived without you." Caleb shook his head. "We've saved each other. You've kept us moving, kept us alive. I'm just here to help." The night was long, but they rested cautiously, taking turns keeping watch. The forest seemed almost alive with its icy sounds, branches snapping under frost, snow falling from high limbs, distant calls of animals stirring in the darkness. Yet they felt a strange sense of safety together. The bond they had built through hardship was stronger than fear, stronger than the storm outside. The following morning they resumed their journey, climbing higher to reach a ridge that overlooked the valley. Taya knew this was their chance to end the pursuit decisively. They moved quietly, almost like shadows among the snow-covered pines. Caleb followed closely, watching her carefully, ready to act at a moment's notice. As they reached the top, they saw the men struggling below, slowed by snowdrifts and hidden obstacles. Taya's eyes narrowed. "We can cut them off," she whispered. "If we control the path to the creek, they can't move without risk." Caleb nodded. "Let's do it carefully, one step at a time." They positioned themselves near a narrow passage where the gorge funneled into a frozen creek. The men below were unaware of their presence, moving slowly and cautiously. Taya and Caleb waited, hearts pounding, ready for the final moment. When the men stepped into the narrow pass, Taya gave a small signal. Caleb moved first, blocking their path, while Taya used the terrain to her advantage, guiding the men towards slippery rocks and unstable snow. The men stumbled, shouted, and struggled to regain their footing. One slipped on the ice, sliding dangerously close to the edge of the creek. Caleb and Taya remained calm, careful not to use unnecessary force, but letting the terrain do the work. The men's own missteps and impatience worked against them. Within minutes, the hunters were disoriented, exhausted, and no longer able to continue their pursuit. Taya exhaled, relief flooding her chest. "It's done," she said softly. "They won't follow us anymore." Caleb nodded, watching the forest below. "For now, the land has protected us, but we must keep moving. Others might come, or the weather could turn. We stay cautious until we're safe." Together they moved along the creek, stepping carefully over ice and snow. The danger was behind them, but the journey was not yet over. Taya felt a sense of triumph, but also gratitude, for the forest, for her own instincts, and for Caleb's guidance. She realized that survival was not just about strength or skill, but about trust, teamwork, and the courage to face danger with another beside you. By evening, they reached a small clearing where the creek widened and the snow was less treacherous. Here, Taya could finally see the distant smoke of a small Apache encampment. Her heart leapt. Perhaps some of her people had survived. Perhaps she could finally reunite with family and friends, share her story, and warn them of the dangers in the forest. Caleb watched her reaction with a quiet smile. "This is your home," he said softly. "Go to them. You've earned it." Taya nodded, her eyes bright with emotion. "And you? Where will you go?" "I wander," Caleb replied. "But I will remember this journey. I will remember how you survived, and how we survived together." Taya smiled, grateful for his presence and the lessons he had taught her. She hugged him briefly, then stepped forward toward the encampment. Each step felt lighter, freer, as though the weight of the pursuit in winter had lifted. When she finally reached the Apache encampment, she was greeted with cautious relief. Some faces were familiar, others new, but all welcomed her with a mixture of surprise and joy. Taya shared her story, warning of danger and recounting the treacherous journey along Winter Creek. Her people listened, amazed by her skill, courage, and the quiet companionship that had seen her through the frozen wilderness.